So, welcome back to the Green Room, where we discuss the latest happenings in cannabis. I'm Martin Lane, the co-founder of Cannabiz, and joining me this week is Cannabiz Editor-at-Large, Rhys Cohen.
Good morning.
Hi, Rhys, how are you?
All right.
Good. And our special guest, United in Compassion founder and Australian Medicinal Cannabis Association chair, Lucy Haslam. Welcome, Lucy.
Thanks, Martin. Hi, Rhys.
Hiya. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, we're going to get straight into it because Lucy is possibly one of the busiest people in cannabis at the moment. So, and you've been busy this week hosting a meeting of military veterans, politicians, medical professionals, industry leaders and advocates to explore the creation of a campaign to fight for proper veteran access to medicinal cannabis. Now, I know I was there, but for the benefit of those who weren't, how did it go?
Well, you're probably a better judge than me, Martin, but I felt at the end of it that it went quite well. It was a difficult task because it was quite a big meeting and probably bigger than I would have liked for a first meeting. But my phone didn't stop ringing once people knew that it was on. There were a lot of people wanting to be either on the line just to listen or to contribute. Sorry, the dogs are going off here. Look, I think for a first meeting, I thought it was very productive. We've come away with lots of action points, and you've just got to find time in your day to follow them up.
And it's probably worth, we'll sort of, let's come back to what the outcomes were in a sec, but it's probably worth just kind of, for those who don't know, just maybe giving a bit of a pen picture as what kind of sparked you to get people together to confront the issue in the first place.
It's kind of been the story of my life with United in Compassion. So I just started hearing from a lot of people, and seeing in media. So there was the story of Derek Pryor, who was a veteran with PTSD who had been knocked back for his legal approval for medicinal cannabis for the treatment of PTSD, even though he was using medicinal cannabis himself and having great results. So he's a guy who's spent years in and out of hospitals with very serious mental health conditions and a very poor quality of life. And, he's tried to do the right thing. He's tried to, access it legally, and obviously can't afford to pay for it himself as a returned serviceman, but DVA continued to knock him back, and they'd knocked his appeal back for the second time just the day before the meeting. So that was quite timely. So there's those kind of stories that just don't sit well with me. I mean, I had a son in the military. I know a lot of his friends. I know he's lost friends to suicide. I've met quite a few of them over the years. We certainly took a veteran to the Senate inquiry into barriers to patient access, who is a young man who's lost probably 10 friends to suicide from PTSD. So it's something that is just, it's there and it's big and it's ugly. And a lot of people seem to be trying to ignore it. I think that seems to be the attitude of our government. The fact that people have had to fight so hard for the government to step out of the way and stop opposing a royal commission into veteran suicides, I think is kind of telling and kind of disappointing at the very least. So I just felt I needed to do something about it. And I don't know if Rhys can remember, back in 2018, we formed the Australian Medicinal Cannabis Alliance when there were lots of barriers being thrown in the way by the state governments. When the pathway to SAS approvals was so long that I had it printed up and I had to stand on the table and hold it up for it to drop to the ground. That was the process that the government set out. So we formed that alliance to try and combat those barriers. And I think we were quite successful in getting government to take that to COAG and for the states to sort of step out of the way, like to a point. There was still obviously lots to do there. So I just thought maybe we can replicate that. Maybe we can get the right people in the room, just have a bit of a brains trust, talk to the veterans, see what they're experiencing. And there was a lot of passion in that room, I felt. One of the veteran organisations representatives who was going to be there sent a very late apology because he was actually with a family who had just had a family member commit suicide. So that's the reality of it. And I don't know. I don't know if it's just me, if I'm a soft touch, but I just don't know how some people sleep at night within the bureaucracy, knowing that that's going on and knowing that there's something that they can do about it.
I mean, it is staggering when you kind of, we obviously covered the story of Derek being knocked back for a second time this week. And when you look at the letter from the DVA, it's pretty cold. But I think it's worth pointing out for the sake of a bit of devil's advocacy that their point is, the point they make was the same point they made when they knocked back the first application, which was there just isn't enough evidence of efficacy. Yeah. And that's just the thing that they keep coming back to. So even though Dr. Matty Moore, Derek's GP, kind of made lots of points about how, this wasn't trying to set a precedent. It was about looking at Derek's needs first and looking at it from that point of view. They just came back with this very bureaucratic response. Here's three pieces of evidence we can cite that say that the research just isn't strong enough or it isn't there. So I guess, Rhys, I might bring you in on this at this point. It is obviously a very emotive issue, and I think everybody kind of shares Lucy's frustration. But ultimately, if the answer is always going to be there's not enough evidence, is the answer just to get more evidence?
Part of it, for sure. And there's interesting questions to be asked about why there is, the experience of people with PTSD using cannabis for medicinal purposes is very well covered in the sort of anecdotal and observational study literature. It's been very well covered for quite some time. We've seen relatively fewer high quality, large scale clinical trials investigating this condition in that patient population than we have for others. Part of that's probably to do with the difficult, sensitive nature of doing that kind of research. I imagine, depending on where you are, you probably need buy-in from Veterans Affairs departments or defense departments. They can be notoriously a bit cagey about that kind of stuff. And the best place to do that, one of the best places to do that research would be in the United States. And as we know, Lucy, Sue Sisley and co have valiantly, heroically attempted to conduct clinical trials looking at the potential efficacy of medicinal cannabis in that population, only to be blocked time and time again by regulators and product quality issues and so many bureaucratic hurdles. So that's part of it. I think it's also probably like a risk aversion thing, like I imagine the DVA knows the horror of PTSD in their community and know that it's just, producing immense human suffering. And I suspect that there'd be some people within the government or within those departments who go, if we allow someone access to cannabis who has PTSD and they end up hurting themselves, does that look bad for us? There's probably some risk calculations there as well. But in this case, in the cases we're talking about, this is someone who's very obviously benefited from medicinal cannabis, extraordinarily so. At least in this case, it would make sense considering that it appears to have already worked very well, that you would go, yeah, okay, in this case, let's make an exemption. That's kind of what the whole subsidy process is for, right? But yeah, it would be good to see more research in this area. It's not getting any less of an issue. I don't know why we're not.
Lucy, I might put this in the kind of bucket of, like the blue touch paper and stand 10 paces back. But what do you think the DVA's motivation is in this? Is it a financial issue? Is it that they really just don't see the science?
Look, Martin, I just don't know. I don't know how they think in those kind of places. I mean, it's not dissimilar to what we went through back in 2014, 2015, when we were trying to encourage them to allow people with terminal illness to access medicinal cannabis, and yet the government still took cannabis out of category A of the SAS scheme, for terminally ill. And I remember at that time there was a a terminally ill lady in hospital in Western Sydney actually dying, and she'd been approved for her cannabis through SAS-A, and it was actually in the country. And because the law had changed, the government had removed it and therefore would not allow her on her deathbed to access cannabis that she'd paid for and that was in the country for her. You know, so I'm just not on the same level as these people, and I don't know what motivates them. I don't know whether it's individuals with personal biases or individuals that are ignorant to, you know, like, to me, the simple question of why is there not enough evidence? Well, it's very simple. It's in the history of prohibition. You know, we stopped any study on the plant for, you know, nearly 100 years, 80 years. So that explains why there's a lack of evidence, but it doesn't mean that, you know, the evidence wouldn't be there had the trials been done. And, you know, observational studies are showing it, the real world is showing it. And so I don't get what's behind it. I don't know if it's just down to individuals. And I think certainly I came up against that with the New South Wales government and the health minister at the time that I was sort of battling to get cannabis there for people with terminal illness. It really came down to the personal biases of one or two ministers. And we're hearing that this is directives from the minister. I mean, I wrote to the minister last year, got a very lackluster reply from one of his staff that really said nothing. I would love the opportunity to be in the room with them and, you know, and try and get behind what makes them think like this, because, you know, you only have to speak to someone like Sue Sisley, who is so passionate about this that she's prepared to sit on a meeting halfway around the world at 1 a.m. Because she feels so strongly, because she's seen so much evidence of it, you know, as somebody who studies veterans with PTSD. You know, I contacted Dedi Mary in Israel, and he again says, Lucy, I'll send you as much data as I can, because we've been using it here for our servicemen for some time. And like, it just doesn't all add up. But that's not dissimilar to everything that we've had to go through from 2014 to now. It's just been barrier after barrier.
And I think, like, you know, not to trivialize the issue that we're talking about, but I think it's important to remember how many of those barriers have been overcome and transformed. I mean, like, clearly, yes, lots of room to improve still, but it was only a few years ago. It blows my mind. Like, you know, I remember Lucy sitting in that room with you at the launch of the Alliance in 2018, and there was that, you know, 3-meter long flow chart of the process that you'd have to follow to get access to medicinal cannabis. Within a year, almost all of those processes had been streamlined or removed. At the time, this is only, what, 3 or 4 years ago. At the time, we were seeing a few dozen patients get access per month. We're now up to about 10,000 a month. And that is significantly, and I would say almost entirely, down to really effective advocacy, using the media, telling patient stories, and influencing, really directly and massively influencing government policy in a way that's really not very commonly seen across any field of government policy or health policy. It's quite extraordinary.
It's funny, actually. Sorry, go on, Lucy. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and yet they kind of trivialize you and put you down as, you know, oh, you know, you're just an advocate, you're a grieving mother, or whatever. You're a disruptor. You know, I went from being somebody who was, you know, carrying the voice of many, and the politicians sort of suddenly thought, oh gosh, there's something to this, we should get interested, to all of a sudden being a disruptor. And really, I haven't changed what I've been saying. I'm still saying the same thing. I'm still saying that a system's not working when you've got more people using an illicit market than the legal route. You know, we have a problem. And I think with the veterans, it's so serious because we're losing so many of them to suicide. So that's unnecessary death. It's even worse than losing people to cancer or to illness or disease. You know, we're losing them because of entirely preventable reasons, And yet I think the government has, you know, like, I think if we have to shame the government into sitting up and listening by bringing patient stories to the media and to the fore, like we've done in the past with people who are dying, or children who have epilepsy, you know, for God's sake, they're still fighting for access. You know, it shouldn't be this hard, but there's a lot of good in humanity, but there's a lot that leaves a lot to be desired, and for whatever reason, for a whole complex number of reasons, people just don't like the idea of cannabis until they need it, and then they change it.
It's interesting what you say, because I was gonna mention that it's almost like that difference or the confluence, if you like, between lobbying and PR, in that, you know, lobbying tends to require data, and there was lots of talk at the meeting about getting data and evidence and proof, and PR tends to rely more on, you know, patient stories, and it feels like, you know, it was obviously before my time in the industry, but what you managed to do during those kind of 2014 to 2020 kind of years was kind of combine the two, so that, you know, I was thinking about this the other day in the context of Derek, really, that there was a lot of coverage, but those stories tend to be more local than national, because they only go so far in telling the story of an individual. But when it becomes an individual who represents a cohort, as you say, a bunch of people, you put it so eloquently there, that, you know, these are unnecessary deaths of people who have served their country. But when you back that with also evidence, you know, so there's the individual story, then there's the evidence of how many other people are in that situation unnecessarily, then I think that's when you really manage to kind of combine that PR and lobbying kind of ability, and that's where you kind of get the shift. But like you say, it really shouldn't be this hard. And I think I speak for everybody when we sort of thank you for your you know, ongoing energy and passion for what you're doing. I wanted to sort of actually broaden it out a little bit at that point and just talk about patient access more generally, and get your sense of where you think things are at. I know when the TGA announced their decision on down scheduling in December, AMCAR were you know, worked very hard to kind of manage people's expectations. There was some fairly kind of excitable commentary in the mainstream press, some of which I have to say fueled by people in the industry. Are you kind of, how are you seeing this year progressing? You know, there's talk that, you know, there won't be any over-the-counter medicine available for 12 to 18 months. How are you seeing patient access more generally beyond the veteran community?
Look, as Rhys said a minute ago, we still have a long way to go. I think in terms of CBD over the counter, I think it's very ambitious to say that there'll be products in 12 to 18 months. And really that's, I mean, I'm no expert, but I did, you know, I have discussed this quite frequently with people like Teresa Nicoletti and Teresa, from, you know, coming from that place of having quite, intimate knowledge of the industry and the TGA and how things work and what's required to produce the evidence and build the data and the safety profiles that are going to get those products to market. You know, she firmly believes that we're still quite a way off. I mean, perhaps it's a case of first in best dress. Perhaps there's clinical trials sort of that are in progress that are building the data, and you know, companies are sort of at the point that they're saying they're at. I don't necessarily believe the announcements, but you know, it's such a robust such a robust requirement that they need to go through that takes time. So you know, whether the TGA relaxes some of the requirements, that might be possible. I'm really not sure if they want to meet some customer and consumer expectation. But at the moment, it's, you know, to me, it still seems a long way off. And, you know, CBD is not everything. So, yeah, I think we just, I've gotten used to being disappointed, but I was very disappointed. I was very disappointed with the kind of misinformation that was generated around that time. And I feel for patients. It's incredibly confusing for patients. And it's confusing for doctors, and all that serves the purpose of, you know, turning doctors off. It's all still too in the hard basket for a lot of them. And, you know, that's something that we need to work hard to change.
And is the association's sort of position to continue to lobby the TGA to you know, they've made their decision now in terms of down scheduling? Do you think there's still some opportunity to get them to fast track approvals, or just to make it easier more generally, or are we kind of just in a waiting game now?
Oh, look, I think we won't give up trying, but I do think we're largely in a waiting game. There's only so many battles you can pick, and you know, getting the TGA to change anything that they've done is quite a difficult task. So I think we'll just wait and see. It's going to be a case of first in, best dressed probably, and there's, you know, I don't doubt that there are people that are working with that as their aim. But for me, to be honest, 100% honest, like, I mean, my interest is in patient advocacy, and it's in removing, you know, the barriers. That's all just a little bit way too hard over my head. It's so complicated, and I think it's kind of almost it's part of the problem, the complexity. But, you know, I'm still of the firm belief that we chose the wrong kind of regime in the first place.
Instead of going with the single regulator, you mean?
Yeah, my you know, there's obviously no chance that that's probably going to ever happen. But, I just think we've made it as hard as we could make it, and, you know, you just got to wonder what was the motivation behind making it so difficult.
Okay, look, I think we're going to have to let you get on with your day job in a minute. And on that topic, I just wanted to chat quickly about Australian Medicinal Cannabis Symposium, which is back as a live event. Everything crossed in August. Program looks amazing. Tell us a bit more.
Look, it's a very ambitious program, I've got to say, but, you know, I guess it's, you know, the industry has developed over the years. When I think back to the first symposium, it was back when you didn't actually say cannabis out loud, and that was, you know, that a lot of people were hearing about cannabis for the first time, and there was a lot of kind of just public curiosity, and, you know, and there was no industry, so there was just no industry at all. So it's developed since then, and this year's the first time we're having an industry program, and that's been put together by AMCA industry members. And I think, you know, I mean, I'm not an industry person myself, but just looking at the topics that they're going to be covering, I think if you were somebody who was looking to get into the cannabis industry, didn't know where to start, or you were looking to make connections, I think it will be definitely the right place for you to try and be, to get all of that at once. Very excited that we're having the first Australian Nurses Conference on medicinal cannabis. And that's really off the back of 4 years of working with nurse associations on this. So they've come to me and asked us to put this program on for them. So that's very exciting. That's day one. We've got places like the New South Wales Nurses and Midwives who are donating $20,000 to try and get New South Wales nurses up here for that event. So I think it's a measure of the interest and the support that nurses across the country are giving medical cannabis. And I think that's kind of playing to the long game, but it's definitely been an ambition. I think nurses actually get stuff done, and I think nurses can subtly push, and they can very positively support their patients who, you know, we've grown used to the idea of nurses in oncology wards turning a blind eye to the patient that's out on the veranda having a little puff. You know, we want to get it to the point where hospitals, respite centres, you know, daycare centres have policy in place so that when patients come with legal approval, they're not having their product confiscated, which is what's going on at the moment. So I think that the way to do that is by engaging with nurses. So we've put a lot of effort into that. And of course, then we have our day program, which runs over 2 days. That's open to the general public, but the focus is very definitely medical and research oriented. And we have just a one-day event for health professionals where we'll have people like Dustin Sulak talking about dosing and dosing made easy, which I think is something that every prescribing doctor wants to know. And David Caldecott, of course, will be in his element, and people like Dr. Vicky Kotsirilos, who was the first Australian prescriber, who will be talking about how to prescribe in Australia. So I think they're all very important elements. We're trying to cater to everybody's expectations and everybody's individual needs. And, you know, COVID willing, we'll all be together and have a great few days.
Well, it's going to be so good.
Does sound amazing, and it also sounds like an awful lot of cats to herd. So we better let you go and get on with that. I'll put a little, just a link to your. Is your email the best contact at the moment for anybody who wants further information about Symposium?
Or maybe the website of the Symposium.
There is information on the UIC website.
Cool.
We have a Symposium page, and the programs should all be up there next week. They're just being entered at the moment, but you know, like you say, it's like herding cats. I think we have over 60 speakers over the 3 days, so it's a lot of herding. But I'm really aware that we need to get those programs up, so they'll be evolving, I guess. But at least it will give people a bit of an idea if they want to pick and choose their way around the symposium, or, you know, purchase the tickets for, you know, the main attraction that they want to see.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll
and importantly, we'll be very much focusing on the veteran issue,
right.
and also on the issue of drive change, and supporting that. So I think, you know, there are 3 things really that are holding, you know, that are big in my mind, to give a platform to. That's the cost issues and the barriers for general patients, the problems for veterans with PTSD, and the driving issue, which affects every medical cannabis patient pretty much.
Okay, well, we'll let you go and get on with that, Lucy, and really looking forward to getting together in August, and hopefully, sure we'll chat before then. Thanks.
Thanks both. Thank you.
Okay, well, in other news, ANTG has announced a merger with Canada's Asterion Cannabis and its wholly owned Australian subsidiary. The companies are joining forces to build a $400 million facility in Queensland, which will eventually produce more than 500,000 kilos of medicinal cannabis each year and create 1,000 jobs in the Toowoomba region. Rhys, ANTG CEO Matt Cantello called this a golden opportunity for Australia to reach its full potential in growing and cultivating for both the domestic and export markets. Is he right?
Well, I think the key words here are eventual and potential, right? Like, yeah, I mean, Australia could grow 1 billion kilograms of cannabis per year. That doesn't necessarily mean that we should. The large scale cultivation facility news stories are obviously, you know, ring some alarm bells in many people's minds. We've been there before. You only need to look at Canada to see how that played out. I don't think this is necessarily the same thing. I think ANTG have proven themselves to be pretty sensible and quite sophisticated business operators, and they are unlikely to launch into a massively unprofitable, hugely speculative acquisition that just runs them into the ground and then they have to sell it for pittance a few years later, like so many of the other big players have done. But time will tell, right? I think the thing to keep in mind is if you think about cannabis and the global cannabis industry, like another sector, say you know, like the internet, for example, in terms of where we're at historically, you know, maybe Ask Jeeves is still the most used search engine, if that sort of makes sense to people as a corollary. Like, we're so early in the development of this industry on a global level, on a longer historical timeline. Eventually, there will be much more demand than that Toowoomba facility could possibly mean. it's just a question of timing, having capacity, building out capacity in anticipation of, you know, demand growing sufficient to justify that. So I think, yeah, doing it in a staged approach makes sense. And, you know, who knows? The cannabis industry is unpredictable. Things can move incredibly quickly. Things can not. It's a risk. But that's why, you know, they're in the business, and we're commenting on them, right?
Yeah, it's interesting what you say, because
that.
there was a great thread on LinkedIn started by Matt Lammers from MJ Biz, who was pointing out that Australia's entire industry will only be worth about $200 million in sales this year, and obviously that's going to be sort of carved up by quite a few companies, and that actually almost, you know, nobody wants to be an importer apart from, you know, at the moment, Australia, ironically. And I think Matt Cantello, you know, sort of said in his response, look, you know, the merged entity is going to be taking, as you say, a phased approach to match kind of global demand. But obviously the fears are we could end up with, you know, massive oversupply and, you know, Australia becoming the new Canada. I mean, I guess the benefit that the Australian, you know, industry has is that it happened in Canada. People saw it. It would be surprising if people as smart as Matt and others made the same mistakes, wouldn't it?
It would be surprising. I mean, it could happen. The other thing to keep in mind is Australia is not like Canada. So in Canada, massive oversupply, insane amounts of inventory that'll never get sold, that'll eventually be destroyed. Partly because, I mean, it's not exportable. You know, this isn't GMP quality material in Canada. It's not a mandatory requirement. So even if, and this didn't end up happening, but even if, you know, Germany and France and Brazil and, you know, wherever opened up as rapidly as some of the more bullish analysts and commentators were expecting, Canada would still be in the same situation it is at the moment, because that product can't go anywhere. No one wants it. The Canadians don't want it, which is different to Australia, because everything that's cultivated here by default is, you know, broadly speaking, exportable. That does rely on those international markets opening up and demand increasing. So I guess, you know, time will tell. And, you know, yeah, $200 million this year, that's true, in terms of the, you know, the potential size of the Australian market in terms of product revenue. But I wouldn't be surprised if that doubled again the following year. There's no reason at the moment to assume that we won't be able to sustain close to exponential growth for at least a few years. That's just off the top of my head, right? But there's plenty of room to grow here. And at the same time, there's hopefully plenty of room to grow overseas. And Australian companies are better positioned by default to play in the global export market than most Canadian companies are.
Okay, all right. I just want to go back to your Ask Jeeves reference. I didn't quite understand that. So are you saying that Ask Jeeves is your favorite search engine?
It definitely was, and then it got made defunct, and I was so upset, you know. And now I have to use Yahoo. No, I joke, of course. I'm a Bing guy at heart.
You're a Bing guy, yeah. You always struck me as a Bing guy.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. And finally, Uber CEO Dara. Now I haven't practiced this. So Dara Khosrowshahi has told CNBC the ride-sharing company would consider getting into cannabis delivery if recreational use is legalized in the US at a federal level. Obviously, if it happens, there'll be no need for Americans to leave home at all, will there, really, other than to storm government buildings and spread coronavirus? But Rhys, I'm wondering, indulge me for a second, what other parts of American life could go green? I mean, I think there are already drive-in cannabis cafes, as far as I'm aware. But, you know, are we going to see Big Macs cooked in CBD oil? Build that wall now in hemp concrete was my favorite attempt at a joke for this segment.
100%.
But
100%. Yeah, it's funny. Like, I remember I was in New York City 2000 and I don't even remember, a couple of years ago, for a friend's wedding, and just walked into a coffee shop, and on the menu was CBD. Add it to your coffee. you pay an extra few bucks to add some CBD to your coffee. And I was like, gobsmacked. But that's kind of where America's at, right? It's a completely different place in so many ways, especially with cannabis, and it's just going from strength to strength. So yeah, why not? I mean, it won't be long before a US president consumes cannabis in public. That'll probably happen in the next 20 years.
Will they inhale, do you think?
Yeah, I reckon. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, call me. I'll tell you what. In 20 years' time, we'll meet on Sydney Harbour Bridge at midday on January 1st. And if I'm right, then I win the bet. And if I'm not, then I'll give you $5 or something like that.
I thought you were going to say that at that point, if you're right, I would have to climb Sydney Harbour Bridge. And I was thinking, in 20 years' time, I don't think I'm going to be capable of climbing Sydney Harbour Bridge. It seems a bit unfair.
Well, in 20 years' time, let's see if they've got a ramp up for you.
Well, I've got one for you. In 10 years' time, I think I've said this before, people will be going to cannabis farms like they currently go to wineries. There you go. And if I'm right,
100%.
No, I won't go there. All right, look, we better leave it there. Good to chat. I really enjoyed that conversation with Lucy as well. Symposium does sound like it's going to be amazing, and she works so hard and does so much. I'm so absolute, nothing but admiration for Lucy. Anyway, moving on. See you next week.
See you then.
Cheers. Bye.